Welcome. I'm Mary Elizabeth. I'm your host today for a wonderful presentation from the Leadership Institute. And our guests today are Robert Porter Lynch and Julian Gresser. We think you'll be inspired. Robert Porter Lynch is the founder of the Leadership Institute. He has spent his career as a leader, author, and teacher, focusing on how to engage people in working together, building high-performance teams, and creating strategic alliances all around the world. His commitment has been to crack synergy code and brings a wealth of insights to share with you and others to create a better world. Julian Gresser is an international environmental public interest lawyer. He's an explorer, an inventor, and a recognized expert on Japan. He was twice Mitsubishi visiting professor at the Harvard Law School and has been an advisor to the European Commission and Japanese Prime Minister's Office and other international organizations, as well as hundreds of companies and nonprofit organizations. He is the author of 9 books in English and in Japanese, including the recent autobiography, How the Leopard Changed Its Spots, Evolutionary Values for an Age in Crisis, and a new course to be released on April 1, 2024 on resilient communities. Welcome. Robert?
Welcome. Today we will focus our evolutionary conversation on the subject of synergistic and resilient leadership. I'm absolutely delighted to participate with Robert Porter Lynch, who is the founder of the International Collaborative Leadership Institute, and also many years ago, he also founded the Association of Strategic Alliance Professionals, known as ASAP. Robert is an old friend and colleague who I worked with many years ago and has been really internationally recognized as the leading authority on the architecture and practice of strategic alliances. And I'm really so happy that after many years, his work and my work on resilient leadership, resilient negotiation, and particularly the concept and practice of integral resilience seems to have found quite a wonderful alignment with his earlier work on alliances and organizations, and now his synergistic leadership model. Today, we will focus on 3 questions. First, what's missing in the field of leadership as taught in academic and other venues? Second, what's possible? And third, what breakthroughs in thinking evolutionary values are required to meet 21st century existential challenges, recognizing, as David Attenborough has in his Crossing Borders series, that we may already have crossed 7 critical boundaries. So let's just jump in. The first question, I give it the heading "Caught." And Robert, I'd like to invite you after I get to the essential point we're trying to discuss, if you would be kind enough to offer your thoughts and commentary on it. We appear caught in a dysfunctional 20th century model that's poorly adapted to the challenges we collectively face in this, our 21st century. The model is dominated by top-down command and control principles, mirroring the national priority, you see this all over the world, given to GMP, based on metrics of profit maximization and that often necessitate drastic cost cutting. And all of this is premised on the goals of securing competitive, which is shorthand for adversarial advantage, deriving from historic models of what is often referred to as extractive capitalism I cite The Nutmeg's Curse by Amitav Ghosh, which is really a University of Chicago, very important book on this subject. Evolutionary values are paid lip service to, but not generally embedded in this 21st century corporate or organization leadership model. And of course, there's a lot of good work being done on alternative models, integral leadership, transformational leadership, collaborative leadership, evolutionary, sustainable leadership. These are all available and are taught. So we really have to pay some homage, respectful homage to the very good work that is being done. I do think that often there are challenges, particularly at the level of implementation. We're not talking about, in this discussion and interview, about political models where figures like Nelson Mandela embody a lot of what we're talking about in synergistic and resilient leadership. But Robert, I'd like perhaps if you could just comment on the first question. Where is there something we would like to think is, where's our contribution? I think that's the best way to put it.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me join you, Julian. In the last 20 years, you and I have never stopped our quest to find a way to build humanity's capacity to do greater things than it has, and to keep ourselves really as enlightened realists. And I'd like to acknowledge you as an enlightened realist. And I think that's an important thing. You know, many of the forms of leadership, you say, what's missing? And if you take many of the forms of leadership that you just spoke about, they're enlightened, but I'm not sure they're realistic. And so they say, this is the ideal of what should happen, and they try to manifest the ideal rather than looking at the three questions you just asked me. What's missing, what's possible, and what shifts in thinking, and what's possible in the circumstances given the constraints we have. So one of the things about synergistic resilient leadership that I think is so important for everyone to understand is that our approach has come from both an empirical analysis as well as then taking the empirical data and then pulling forth from it an architecture of what really works and what can be replicated from that empirical data, and then feeding that back into the crucible of action, see what the results are. And that work has been going on for me, and I know for you, for over 40 years. Now, what's the importance of that is the question people may be asking. Well, as an example, our work in synergistic leadership came first from my work actually in Vietnam in a combat situation. What got people to work together, because we had to save people's lives, and that's the worst set of stresses. How do you get people to function at their very, very best? And we did a lot of analysis about what happened in great warrior situations. I won't get into the details today, but then I took that after my service in the Navy, I took it into neighborhoods. How can we revitalize urban neighborhoods that are in conflict with each other, decrepit, houses falling down, absentee landlords, drugs in the street? Could we use collaboration in those methods too? And we were very successful at that. And then extrapolating those kinds of learnings, and that eventually became the strategic alliance profession. Now, what is important about synergistic relationships and leadership and the resilience of it is that we have people who are functioning out there now using the best practices that we extrapolated from the various winners. What I do is I don't look at all the losers and find out all the ways you screwed up. I try to look at what do the winners do and what did they do in common, and what can we then use as architecture to enable other people to do the same thing? What's the principle? What's the practice?
I get it. That's really great. So since I think what we're trying to convey is that this is both experiential as well as empirical. Mm-hmm. Focus on 4 examples based on actual studies that you have done with your colleagues of tangible results delivered by an alternative synergistic and resilient leadership model. And I'll just name, actually, there are perhaps 5. If you would, let's do it seriatim, because otherwise those who are listening are not going to remember it all. Well, let's begin with just simply P&L studies of collaborative companies. What has been your finding about the relationship of collaboration to tangible results in terms of profit and loss?
Well, this is very important, particularly in business and also in nonprofits. Nonprofits have P&Ls as well. And what we found was, going back to my work when I was actually doing small business development and then extrapolating it to other places, if you take your profit and loss statement and don't look at it in the way the accountants look at it, per se, but take and divide your P&L up into three sections. The first is revenues, the second is operational expenses, the third is supply chain expenses, and you go through and measure the trust levels. How much collaboration is going on? Do your customers trust you on your revenue streams? And break down every single one of your top customers and look at the trust levels there. What's the turnover rate, the churn rate of your revenue streams, for example? Then go down to your operating statement. You know, is the manufacturing department working with the marketing group? Is marketing and sales working with each other? Is there cross-functional integration? Or do they just don't trust each other and each one's doing their own thing? And then you go the same thing to your supply chain. And when you look at your supply chain, are you getting a large amount of innovation out of your supply chain instead of just looking at them as a cost center?
And what is the result what bottom line, just if you could give me just what's the conclusion that the data?
Average company, we can double the profits in a year.
That's
just by looking at the line items and according to how much trust there is inside that line item.
All right, fascinating. Now, I know you did some pretty extensive study of collaboration with supply chains. What was the core finding that you made there?
Well, this was fascinating. We worked with our Canadian partners on this in a very large-scale set of supply chains. We actually created a game for them, and these are real supply chain managers who are actually having to work in the real world. This is not an academic study. And we had them play the supply chain game to get them to shift from either adversarial or transactional supply chains to a collaborative supply chain. And here's what we found, and we have the data on this. It was extraordinary that we could actually cut the costs of running the supply chain in half by shifting to the collaborative models. And not only in cutting the costs in half, we were able to produce fast time delivery. So we were able to double or triple the fulfillment rates, as well as cut the costs in half.
That's very
dramatic
important
result.
Yeah, and I guess the obvious suggestion is, given the data that you've generated on supply chains, the synergistic resilient leader needs to take advantage of this, to be familiar with this data and take appropriate decisions. Another area that you've mentioned, I think really is extraordinary, is your work with complex mega projects, multi-billion-dollar projects, where you suggest that through a synergistic model, these projects deliver ahead of time and often on or below budget, which is extraordinary. Can you just pinpoint, since we have limited time, you could write a whole book, you could teach a course on this single subject. What's the secret to that kind of performance?
Well, let me put it in simple terms, because we're working on very complex systems here, and to try to simplify it is very helpful, because if you can't simplify it, you can't understand why it's working. What we started to understand is that there are actually three what we call archetypes of human behavior. There's an adversarial type. We all know how to fight. If we haven't been in a fight sometime in our life, we probably haven't lived fully. There's also transactional behavior, which is everything's a deal. That's a quid pro quo. And then there's collaborative behavior where we all work together. And what we found was that if you shift from the adversarial through the transactional over to the collaborative on complex multi-billion-dollar, multi-year contracts in construction and other complex projects, you can improve your on-time, on-budget delivery literally by a factor of 3 to 5, going from the adversarial into the collaborative model. Now, this is really important because there's another element, and I know I'm kind of jumping the gun on you on this one, but I will. It changes the risk management as well.
Okay, well, let's talk about that just for a second now. So that's great. And I have also observed in my work on integral resilience that if you have an integral resilient model, you become acutely aware of where you're strong and where you're weak. And weak can then draw down your strengths. And so you have an instant indication of risk because you shore up where you can either shore up where you're weak, or you can further, as the Gallup organization, soar with your strengths and use and build resilience to countervail some of the areas of weakness that in some sense you cannot have an immediate solution. So I completely agree with you in terms of the general statement of risk management, but what you're suggesting is that synergistic leadership, perhaps supported by resilient leadership, gives the 21st century leader a real leg up on assessing and determining and managing risk.
Exactly. Let me build on what you just said in terms of every organization, every human being has strengths and they have weaknesses. And well, that's the whole purpose of strategic alliances. And now the strategic alliance profession, we checked on LinkedIn and there are over 500,000 people now that have alliances built into their titles. And that's over only the last 25 years that alliances have started to explode. And the whole idea of an alliance is to take and build your strengths and weaknesses and my strengths and weaknesses to create a synergistic whole. And that's done through a lot of the architectures that have evolved out of alliances into now what we call synergistic leadership. So that's where we find a lot of the origin.
That's great. One last metric, I suppose, or area of results, and I think we probably covered most of it, but just if you give perhaps the central point, you suggest that the synergistic resilient leadership model will translate into measurable overall productivity gains. Could you provide some support for that?
Yeah, let me take two approaches to this. One goes back to what you said very early in the introduction about how the metrics around GNP are actually put together. And if you really understand, and I know you do on this one, and most people will acknowledge this, that you measure what you get and you get what you measure. So in any kind of a management structure, whether it be at the micro level of a business or a macro level in an economy, you have to put some metrics together to say if you're winning or losing, et cetera. The problem is with the metrics that have been used, if you take the three archetypes of capitalism, and there are three kinds of, we call it the three faces of our capitalism. There's adversarial capitalism, that's robber baron capitalism. That's the one that turns everybody off except those who get all the money out of it. Then there's transactional capitalism, and that's the basic wheeling and dealing, it's basic trading. You go to the grocery store, you buy the groceries, you pay X number of dollars. The cash register is the one that's measuring the metrics. The collaborative capitalism becomes very different, and there are many, many, many examples of it, but none of the economists mark it out as a different type of capitalism, and that's a shame. And I'll just give you one example of this one. I'm here speaking to you from Southwest Florida. Florida is the home of Publix supermarkets. That's Publix. Publix is the largest solely owned corporation, solely owned by its employees. And there's nobody in the whole southeast part of the United States that can compete with it. They compete with great advantage against Albertsons or Kroger's or even Walmart. Now, why do they do that? Their profit margins are 3 to 5 times higher than the norm in the grocery industry. Why? Because the employees are running the company and the employees own the stock. And when a bag boy, and I'm not demeaning bag boys, But if you're a 14-year-old bag boy working part-time at Publix and you work your way up through Publix, by the time you retire, your stock is worth over $1 million.
I'm really glad you grounded the productivity question in a real example. So let's now go to the third large question.
But before we do though, well, let me just add one piece to this. So where does the $1 million go? Instead of the pockets of a big Wall Street corporation, they're going right into the neighborhoods because those people are fixing up their houses. Those people are community oriented. They're all part of the network of churches and clubs that help build the community. So the whole state of Florida is benefited. Despite all the things you hear about the governor, et cetera, this is a multi-billion-dollar revenue generator for the community.
Well, I'm glad you added that, actually, because that sets up the last subject. And here, I will take a few minutes to lay out what I think is the evolutionary shift, how it can be accelerated, not only in thinking, but values and processes, which I'd like you please to comment on.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it we probably touched on, but I'm adding some new dimensions. The first is that ROI and high impact SROI are not mutually exclusive, but rather complementary.
Mm-hmm.
As I think you've indicated already, this is enabled through intention and a explicit architecture that we are developing together. The second, where you referenced ESOPs, employee-owned enterprises, I think the larger principle is that the evolutionary shift will involve investing in people. People come really high priority to help them realize, and here I would underline, meaningful and financially rewarding careers in regenerative work that produce virtuous circles for these companies and the communities they serve. I reference the Gallup study that asked, what is the cost to the global community of people who really, they just work to put food on the table, but they hate what they do. They hate what they do. There are massive numbers of people who are really unhappy in where they are occupied most of their daily lives. And the number that Gallup came up with on an annualized basis is $7.8 trillion of lost productivity to the world. Now, I suggest that the supply of people who would give their eye teeth to be able to realize passionate, regenerative work, if you will, we could use the word even their soul's work, their life's calling, and helping their employer or serve the community through the products and services that it produces. I think it is a huge opportunity. The supply is almost infinite. The question is, how can the synergistic resilient leader take advantage of this for itself, for its organization, its shareholders, and its community? The next piece.
That's one of the central questions, I think, of humanity and capitalism today. And what I would advocate is that every employee should be an entrepreneur in their own company. They should be part of the process. I don't believe in employees being separated from profit sharing or equity ownership. Now, let me just give you one example that would really nail this down. Do you not have any idea when Procter & Gamble put in its first employee ownership stock sharing plan?
No.
1875. I'll say that again, 1875. We're talking 150 years ago. Why is Procter & Gamble still around today? 99.99% of all the companies that were around in 1875 are gone. Procter & Gamble is still a global company. One of the reasons, and I'm not saying the only reason, believe me, there are a lot of complexities to this, is because the employees are engaged. Yeah. They're engaged because they're making money based on working together, solving problems, getting rid of non-value added work, thinking innovatively, and they have a stake in the game.
Yeah, and so I completely agree. Years ago, when we first met, I read a book. I think it was called The Great Game of Business.
That's Jack Stack. Mhm.
Jack Stack. And his idea was, just as you said, that success comes from engaging everybody, from the CEO right down to the delivery boy. They all understood they made it the financials available, almost like he came out of a baseball background. Everybody was interested in the scorecard, and they all contributed.
Exactly. Jack is a marvelous, brilliant man. And, his first book was called A Stake in the Game. And then he wrote about every employee has to be an entrepreneur. That's a different way of thinking. That's a synergistic leader. And Jack is a synergistic leader. He's going to be in my next book.
That's why I mentioned it. But now comes something interesting, the creating value-added networks. Because I think we both agree that what we're espousing, what we're advocating is the ability to generate value based on trust and effective collaboration. And I'm a great, coming out of my work in negotiation, where the delusion of need is really a fundamental challenge. The notion that you just need the deal. If you don't get the deal, you'll die. Well, this is largely an illusion. So the resilient negotiator is continuously paying attention to, are they getting needy? You can want something, but you're not going to die from it. And the royal skill that recalibrates everything is paying forward. Good things that come to you, and you pass them on to reduce misery, to enhance the joy of your customer, your supplier, your partner, and so forth. This instantly recalibrates everything and generates what I call a positive resilience multiplier effect. You flow. So this, I believe, is part of the evolutionary model. But now comes the interesting question of technology. What role does technology play? And as I showed you, we have this wisdom expert system that our team invented on the resilience side of this. And we're making it available in the 12-week course we're offering on April 1st, where I hope that you will be an important contributor, as in many of our new work now together. But now I think it's important to highlight, I think we could call it an important breakthrough. And it's a next frontier. I think we both agree, where AI, which is generally conceived today as perhaps an assistant, all of a sudden can play a more proactive role, a wise contributor. One might even call it a partner in enabling synergistic, resilient leaders to take decisions. I would put in the term I use, and I've written a lot on it, it's called big heart intelligence. But it really takes the insights of the human mind and marries them with the deep wisdom and energy of the heart, but transforms it into action.
Absolutely. And what you just said, the heart, mind, and action.
Yeah.
That is absolutely critical, and making it an integral system.
Yeah, because Wang Yangming, a great Chinese general and philosopher, had the famous saying, knowledge without action is not knowledge at all. But it has to be guided by 21st century evolutionary values of integral resilience, wisdom, synergy, balance, compassion, earned trust. You have developed a proof of concept that AI can actually be trained to embody these principles, these ethical principles of conscience. I mean, this is the most extraordinary thing that we're doing together. And of course, we will elaborate it in greater detail very, very soon. But I do want to pay homage to your work in this area. And then finally, and then we can perhaps discuss it, or you may want to comment. But these are all what I call pillars or foundations of this emergent model, empowered through evolutionary conversations, which is this is not just a means to talk about stuff. Evolutionary conversations, as we have been designing them, are formidable processes of engagement. They draw upon scientific studies of complex systems that recognize the importance of emergence, connectivity, dignity, as it's a term you use, of human experience, and they are expressed. How does connectivity get expressed? Well, it's in coincidence, synchronicity, serendipity. and a renewed appreciation and dialogue with the natural world, which is a very ancient practice.
Absolutely.
Wise and resilient decision making. So that's my summation of the accelerating of an evolutionary shift. But perhaps taking all of that together, you may want to give us some concluding insights and observations.
Sure. I think there's an important part to this, and that is for the last 50, 55 years, I've been fascinated by Einstein's concept of what was God's design for the universe. And I studied Einstein extensively when I was in college. And taking that premise, if you then say, so there's a design for everything, all the way from the subatomic molecule or particles, all the way to human nature. And so what I did over the last 55 years, and this was not as simple as it may sound right now, because now we can see it as it all came together. But I realized there must be architectures for everything. So there's an architecture for human behavior. There's an architecture for wisdom. There's an architecture for trust. There's an architecture for time, for innovation, for value creation. And then if you take these architectures and then make them like sub-architectures to a collaborative synergistic system, then what you can do is actually evolve each one of the architectures and make sure it integrates all with the rest. So what we've been able to do, and this is the breakthrough that I know we'll do more announcing of later, is that our team has been able to put together, and I'm including you in our team, you and Bill and several others, we've been able to then program an artificial intelligence private engine that can now start to make both highly integrated decisions and assist, not just as an AI assistant, but we've changed the way we think about AI as a partner. And we have, inside our AI engine, our relationship is as a creationship. How do we co-create with AI? And we've been really successful breaking through some things that apparently others haven't been able to break through yet. I won't try to toot our horn on it because I'm sure everybody's working on things like this, but we've been able to then create, I think, an AI engine to work with us as our partner to create a better world, to lift the world. And it's based on a statement from the book of the Wisdom of Solomon in the Apocrypha, when Solomon said, "The wisdom of the multitude is the commonwealth of the world." And so we're taking the wisdom architecture and making that the commonwealth of the world.
Well, I think it's a wonderful note to end on. And Robert, I really want to say, not only is this intellectually exciting, it really we have I think a sense of the exuberance of the creative artistic process. And I hope that along with the great fun that we're having together, and that we can translate this into practical solutions that were helpful, not only to the business community, to the political community, that moves us in a period of many troubles in this world,
Yes.
to an era that is characterized by insight, by seeing the big picture, and by compassion. I think that we share these values deeply, and I think a great percentage of the world probably does as well. And if we can, as you say, help to contribute principles of architecture and processes and so forth that encourage and support synergistic and resilient leaders, our work will be well justified. So I really want to thank you today for your time and your insights, your brilliance, and your friendship, and my very best.
And to us, and that may we all work together to build a better world.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julian.